Hello there and welcome back to my second ever video on my channel. Going through my ideas for you, and I thought, do you know what, I want to start right at the very beginning, as I do with my beginner sewists. I take people right up the way through all the fitting stages, and obviously talking about my personal sewing. But I thought let's start at the beginning because I always impress upon my beginners that we need to learn good sewing practice. Certain things that you just can't change. There are certain things that are set and you can find your own way, like whether you pin a pattern down or use pattern weights, whether you use a rotary cutter or scissors, etc. But there are certain things that if you want to have a well turned out garment, something that's not shonky and looks really rubbish, or doesn't fit you, or you dislike, or you think, why has it all gone wrong? Well, it might have gone wrong because you didn't do any of the things that you should have done in good sewing practice. So I like to teach my beginners to do various things at the beginning of their sewing journey that they will hopefully just have in their hand and their muscle memory, and they will continue to do so. So I'm going to talk you through those. So let's begin. Right, first things first, when people come to my sewing lessons as a beginner, they might never have gone on a sewing machine, or they might be someone that's returning to sewing after like 20 plus years. So we always have a chat about why we're there, what we're hoping to learn, previous experience, that type of thing, so that helps me know what everybody wants to learn, and it helps people realise, oh well, they're at the stage I am, because people come in afraid, thinking they're the only one in that position and everyone else is going to be marvellous. It's human nature, isn't it? It's what we all do. I remember being in a business training class years ago, and I was really rubbish at maths at school. I know how to take money off if I want to buy a really lovely pair of shoes. I know to do my percentages, and obviously I know my sewing maths, but rubbish at maths at school. Business course, she said, well, just switch on your calculators and do X, Y, and Z. I started to feel hot and panicky and then angry, and I wanted to walk out because I couldn't even turn the bloody calculator on. And then I thought, you know what, you're an adult. So I stuck my hand up and said, I can't even do this. I can't turn the calculator on. Well, the majority of the people in the room said, I'm exactly the same. So yeah, it's fear that can sometimes hold us back. So I always find out where everyone's at, and then I will have a lot of people that have never put a bobbin in, wind a bobbin up, threaded their machine. So I'll talk them through their machine, and get them all started. And then I reiterate, and this is to the whole room, read your manual for your machine. This thing, obviously this is quite big, it's got a G key, and yeah, we've got a few other languages at the back, but so it'd be quite small, which is the English bit. But everything you want to know is in your manual. What the feet are, what all the stitches are, what the parts are over your sewing machine, what tension you should have it set up, what needles you should use. It's all there. So rather than saying, oh, here's my machine, I'm afraid of it, I don't know what to do, then go to your trusty manual. I refer to this a lot when there's certain things that I haven't done before with my machine, but it's there to help us for a reason. I think it's that thing, isn't it? I hate gender stereotypes, but I do find it's quite true of most women. We don't want to read the instructions, we just want to get on and do the thing. Where I do know the men in my life have always wanted to read the instructions to make it work properly, so I let them get on with that because that's boring as far as I'm concerned. But with sewing, read the instructions, read the manual, and then give it all a try. Get a plain bit of fabric, say calico, bright red thread, and try each stitch, and you can write down the number of which each stitch is, which setting it is, the different stitch lengths, that type of thing. It's invaluable. It will really set you up. So that's my first tip. My second tip is, once we're all working on our sewing machine, making our first project, so I do pin cushions and then zipped purses with my beginners before we move on to making pyjamas. So everyone's saying, right, I'm getting on with my sewing machine because, you know, I now know how to thread it and get my bobbin wound, and I'm all good to go. And then they'll say, oh, my machine's not working. And it can be the simplest thing. So it's getting confident knowing where to check, because usually it is a simple thing. Can't remember what this bit's called, but you know, when you click over to secure your bobbin, when your bobbin's on, I'll put a bobbin on to show you. So your bobbin's on here, and then you flick that over, so it'll wind your bobbin. Well, when you're moving your sewing machine in the car to a sewing lesson, or just moving it around, you could have flicked that over. Well, that's going to stop the needle going up and down. Some machines you pull out the flywheel, others you do this. So just by flicking that, it could suddenly be working. Or the threads could be clumping up and misbehaving. So the first thing I do is I'll take off my spool, I take my bobbin out, and then I'll rethread and put everything back together. Check under your foot plate that there's no lint in the machine, which is lovely. I love getting all that fluff out. That's like quite a satisfying job. Yeah, sad pleasure. A bit like squeezing a horrible spot, isn't it, really? Which is utterly gross of me, but yeah, got to get your pleasures where you can. So get your fluff out. Check your needle isn't blunt. You know, 8 hours sewing is the most you should do with a needle, so that could be causing you problems. Really importantly, check your tension is correct. It should be set at 4. Standardly comes as 4, but people flick around. That tension's there to ensure that your upper thread and your lower thread, they connect properly. Otherwise you'll get bunching below or bunching at the top because it's too loose or too tight. And then I always say, make sure your stitch length is correct. You know, some beginners will sew it too small and then you can't unpick it all. So make sure it's at least 2 centimetres, 2.5 centimetres wide. So I think I'm just checking my list. I wanted to make sure. Yeah, checklist. That is everything on that one. Right, so the next tip I've got for you is about scissors. So where did I put my best ones? These are my best ones. Old rule, we've all come across it. You know, I'll stab you if you use my dressmaking scissors for anything other than cloth. So true, it blunts them. So those are for your fabric, don't want them blunted. Only other dressmakers can use them for fabric if they need to. Paper scissors. What are these called? God, my brain's just gone. Pinking shears. Pinking shears. And then we've got, I don't like this, but rotary cutter. Don't use those very often. And the final one, thread snips. Be careful with those, they're really handy. I used to hang them around my neck until I had them hanging around my neck one summer in shorts, big moth flying around in the evening, so I leapt up to deal with the moth and impaled these in my thigh, and they made a really big hole, lots of blood, so I just felt a bit sick and a bit panicky, and I was just squeezing it together. So I've learned, you know, never to do that, because I've got a nice scar there now from when I did that. So scissors, use them for the right job, and always get a really sharp pair because they need to even cut at this end. When you're cutting notches, you want to just use those little snips, not have to go down to here if it's blunt along there, because if you cut from down there, you'll find you're cutting through your seam allowance and into your project, as I've seen many a time. You will live to regret that. So scissors dealt with. Right, another bugbear of mine, another good tip is, as you're working and you've sewn, I don't know, with a dart or a seam, you have the loose threads at the end, always snip those threads off. If you don't, you'll find when you then go to attach those seams together, those threads can come through to the right side, they can get knotted and jumbled up. It can be a nightmare trying to remove them. So we like neatness, so keep snipping your threads as you go. Top tip. Right, my next tip is know your journey, know where you're going. So read your pattern instructions, they're there for a reason. They will tell you all the stages, you know, to get to your end result. It's like reading a map. I live in Norfolk, in Norwich, so if I want to drive to Glasgow, I'm not just to get in the car and hope I'll get there. I've got to look at a map, and even if I use the sat nav, I need to check where it's taking me. So it's the same with your sewing, know your journey. Now, very, very important when you're starting out to know all the stages you need to go through. You'll find as you've been sewing a lot longer, you'll know the basic construction order, but don't follow, when you're starting out, follow the more experienced sewists, because there's things I do, I don't read the instructions because I know the construction order of garments. I'll only look at the instructions when it's got some other little details that I've not come across before, or there'll be a difference. So yeah, I scan over the instructions if I need to, but a basic dress, basic blouse, trousers, I know the order. The instructions will tell you, say, to work on the bodice darts, and then when you've done all the bodice, move on to the skirt. Well, I pin everything at the beginning, I sew all the darts, so there's certain ways that we do it that's changing things. I go through in my lessons a whole session on reading a pattern, understanding what all the information is, because it's all there. It will give you the seam allowances, it'll give you pattern layouts, and again, when you've been sewing quite a while, you'll ignore the pattern layouts because, yeah, you know, obviously you're putting the patterns on with the grain line matched up to the selvages, you know, all the direction of against the grain if it's on the bias, that type of thing. But I won't use those layouts because I'm often using vintage fabric that's narrower, that I might have less. I want to be able to make sure I can get it out. So I'll start off by laying out my fabric and trying to get the best fit for all my pattern pieces, and then I'll know if I can actually use that fabric for that project or not. Pattern layouts tend to be quite wasteful, but they're there to really help you when you're starting out. So know your journey with all of it. Another tip. Thank you. Right, this tip is about your fabric. So first off, always pre-wash it, because you're buying fabric that's been woven but it's never been near hot water, so it's going to shrink when you wash it. So if you don't pre-wash it, make your garment, you cut your cloth, sew your garment up, and then after you've worn it, you bung it in the machine, it's going to shrink. It can go down a size, or certain parts will become tight. You want to avoid that, so pre-wash your fabric, really, really important. And then when you pre-washed it, it might be a while before you get to work with that fabric, because I like to wash it the minute it arrives or I buy it. And then put a little note on it, what the fabric content is, what the width is, what the length is. So some important information. So when you're going to then use that fabric months or even years later, maybe it'll be the next day, I don't know, but you'll know exactly what you've got there. Now, on your fabric, the selvages are brilliant. Not all of them do this, but they'll have the name of the fabric printed on. Some will have colours down the side. Now they're brilliant because they will tell you all the exact matches for getting threads. So they're really handy. I often say to people, just cut those off and put them in your purse. So when you're going out to try and find a thread that will match what you're working with, you've got the exact colours there. So that's really handy. Now down your selvage edge, the way fabric's woven, it's on the loom on these prongs, and so you've got those little holes that you'll see down the edge. Now if you've got a plain fabric, unlike this one, and it's a bit hard to tell which is the right and wrong side, just feel it's a bit like braille. You can feel it'll be smooth underneath on the wrong side, and they'll be slightly bumped out on the right side where the prongs have pushed the fabric out. So that really helps you. And then make a note, either pin a note, or if you've got a pen that would work on that colour, or chalk, write R for right side and W for wrong side. Because I find with a lot of my beginners, if they're using a plain fabric, they can suddenly end up with two left leg trousers because they've swapped the fabric round and then used it, you know, so you've got two of the same leg. So that's one way to avoid that, and to know which are your right and your wrong sides. There was something else I wanted to say about that, was also using cotton when you're starting out. It's the most stable, most well-behaved fabric to use, so it won't make you think, I hate this, why did I ever want to take this hobby up? But remember, there are lots of different types of cotton. You know, you've got cotton poplin, you've got cotton with linen mixes, you've got cotton lawn, broadcloth, so there are quite a few. So it's getting familiar with fabrics, but cotton is your best starting point. So that's my other tip. Right, seam allowances, they seem very confusing when you're starting. Why are people talking about seam allowances? What does this mean? Well, the seams are the extra that are built into the design of a pattern, where you can sew. That's the bit that you can afford to lose, and it will still be the correct size once you've got all your measurements sorted out. You know which size you're cutting. So patterns will say either 5/8 of an inch, which is 1.5 centimetres, or they'll say 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, sometimes they'll say half an inch. I'm just a bit of an old fuddy. I work in inches. My brain just doesn't do centimetres, but obviously I have to move between the both, but I stick to inches mainly. So some machines will have the lines for the seam allowance marked out on the foot plate, but if you don't have that, and a lot of the sewing machines that I see with my beginners, they've got the more basic ones, they won't have the seam allowance marked out. So I always say mark your seam allowance by measuring from the needle out to where your 5/8 line is, and get some washi tape or masking tape, something that isn't so sticky, and then tape that down where your seam allowances are, and you can write on that. So you've got a guide, you know, a line to line the edge of your fabric up against, because the allowance is the difference between the distance between your needle to the edge of your fabric. So either stick some of that down, or you can get this, can you see that, a little happy face with a magnet on the back. I can't pin this on because the magnets come unglued, I've got to glue that back in. But that just attaches like a barrier, so you could put that where your seam allowance needs to be. And my beginners, somebody said in my class last week, I've got about 3 beginner classes going at the moment, that this was the best thing they ever bought. They couldn't believe that such a cheap little tool would be so useful. So a seam gauge ruler or measurer, hopeless on the names of things. So you've got this slidey bit here, so you can set it at the distance as you want. You've got your point turner, a little bit of a straight line, and I've still got to look up what these bits are for. Somebody might know and tell me, but I've still been too lazy to even look up what those bits are for. So I find this absolutely brilliant, especially when I'm doing French seams and I've got to find a 1/4 inch. So I would put it at the edge of my foot, and then I can mark where I need the position of my needle to be. So really handy tips for getting the right seam allowance. Next tip is about how you handle the fabric on the machine. So let's take this off for now. If I take my foot off, under where the foot is are the feed dogs, these rough bits. They're the thing on the machine that guides your fabric through it, or walk it through. And obviously if you're working with a bulkier fabric, then you'll need a walking foot, you know, like wools or slippery fabrics works really well as well. So walking foot is essential for those to make it behave. But when I put this on here, I'm going to sew this bit just to show you. I've already sewn, so I'm going to sew over it. When you start your sewing, hold your threads out taut, because you want to avoid getting that bunching, that knotting. So hold your threads taut as you start to sew, and always back stitch. It's the knot that will secure your work at the beginning and the end. My Dukey automatically does it, it's set, so it will just automatically take it backwards and forwards. So I'm holding my thread, so that's not going to bunch. And can you see, I'm not forcing my fabric through, I'm letting the feed dogs take the fabric through. I'm using my hands to guide that fabric. That's really important, so that I can keep my lines straight. So it's my hands that are just there, they're not forcing that fabric through. When I get to the end stop, and I'll back stitch to do my final knot. So there's a few things in there, aren't there, about how to handle the fabric, how to avoid those thread bunnies, what else, and also to back stitch, so really important. And when I say about pinning correctly, think about the way that your fabric is going to be on your machine. You want the bulk hanging off the edge of the machine here. So pin like this with the pins facing towards you, or you can pin sideways. Yeah, you need to be able to get these pins out easily. So I'm just going to come down. This is just a rough bit of fabric just to explain to you what I'm doing. And it's about handling your fabric correctly. You've got the feed dogs. Take the foot off. Just lift that sewing foot. See the feed dogs there, the bumps there. They're the things that are going to be feeding your fabric through. Your hands are just there to guide, not to force. So I'll line that up with my seam allowance. I'll hold my thread, and then I'm going to start sewing. I'm going to back stitch, so it's putting my knot in, and I pulled that taut so I can get a thread bunny. I'll take my pins out, following my seam allowance, and along I go. And can you see my hands are just guiding? So if I then want to do a curve, I'm keeping my eye on that edge of the seam allowance, and I'm just guiding with my hands to go round and round and round, like so. I'll just take that off. So that's about handling fabric and pinning. Next important tip is about pinning correctly. First off, use the right pins. You don't want pins that you're trying to force through that pull threads. You know, my favourite are the glass head pins because I can iron over those. I like the different colours. Sometimes I've sewn on a bit of name thinking I want to put a red one in now. Looking for fun where I can get it again. And they're easy. Sorry, there's a cat moving about, so wondering what's going on. Got 3 of them moving. So they're really easy to pull out as well. So one, use good pins, and they're not hugely expensive. There's certain tools that you just need to buy the best you can get to make this all work really well and be the most pleasurable experience. Right, so I need to think of the direction I'm pinning. So you're always going to have the weight of your fabric off this side. If you pinned, so it's got to be through here, it's all bunching up, and again your lines of your seams will start moving and they won't be straight. So always hold your fabric thinking of the way it will go on the machine, and pin with the pins facing towards you so you can easily pull them out. So you can either, well, I'll put them in the different directions. You can either pin that way or you can pin in from the side. Then I'll hold these up to show you. Just put a few in. So can you see I'm either pinning so I can pull them out that way, or I can pull them out that way. Either way works. And don't over pin. You don't want to buckle your fabric. Some beginners have a tendency to put a shed load of pins in. Yeah, it's far too many, you just don't need them. But obviously when they're facing towards me, I can easily pull them out. If I pinned, let's do it all the wrong way round. So it's all here, it's all bunching up, and then I get towards my needle and I'm trying to get my finger round and I'm getting the needle in my finger. None of that works. So pin properly, use the correct pins. Final good practice tip, really important, and I do see a lot of people don't do this because it involves the word iron. Now this isn't ironing, this is sewing, and yeah, it's called pressing. It's really important. It's one of these things. It's an essential tool for sewing. Let's put that back over there. Every time my iron's broken, my lovely partner, if I'm in the middle of a project, will go straight out and buy me a new iron because he knows how essential it is that I cannot finish what I'm sewing without an iron. I used to hate ironing. I think I really only got into ironing when I had children. I wanted them to be, you know, 2 little girls, wanted them all to look smart and tidy. So I started ironing. But I don't want to wear crumpled clothes that I've made. So that's the ironing bit. That's the like housewifey, what do you call it? I don't like housewifey, but you know what I mean. House chores kind of bit. This isn't in that realm. Pressing, it's about applying heat to your fabric. So there's various reasons why we do that. We're pressing the iron down and hot steaming. It fixes the stitches. That's really important. You know, it relaxes them, it fixes them in place. So it's not just about getting everything crisp, it's about fixing those stitches. It then ensures that all our darts are facing the right way. You know, they're flat and smooth, whether they're waist ones, we do them all towards the centre. Bust darts, it always says to iron them down. Now if you're bigger busted, there's another tip here, iron your darts, press them upwards. It's really bizarre, but the dart being pressed upwards gives the impression with a bigger bust of it being a little bit more perky, a little bit more raised than it is. Those little visual tricks. So press your darts, press your seams either to one side or open. You want them nice and crisp, so then when you're matching seams to another seam, they all match up nicely. It's not all bulked and awful, you know, when you've got rounded seams. Yeah, it's a real bugbear of mine when I see people's garments that they are so proud of having made, but all the seams aren't matching and it's all a crumpled hot mess. And I just think, why didn't you just go that extra little bit? It wasn't a big chore. So they're my naggy extras about the iron. Right, so I hope you've enjoyed that and found that useful. I haven't seemed too much like I'm lecturing you or telling you off, just trying to be helpful. So if you did enjoy it or found this helpful, I'd love to hear what you thought in the comments. That's always lovely, and it helps me know that I'm doing the right thing, something that you want to see, because yeah, I'm doing this to share my joy of sewing with you. So I want to know that you're enjoying it likewise. So Then I have to say the bit I see everyone say at YouTube videos, because it is important. There's another reason we do this. So please like or subscribe. Subscribe is even lovelier, because I know that I've got people that want to come along with me on this journey of YouTube. So do other of those. So thanks for joining me today, and until next time, happy sewing. Bye bye.